What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're working on a 2008 W211 E63 AMG. Today on the E63, we're going to be covering how to replace your power steering fluid reservoir, as well as how to perform a power steering fluid flush. Now, we recommend you do this service about every 70,000 miles. In some extreme cases, these reservoirs need to be changed out every 2 years, depending on how the vehicle is driven. A couple of things to look for is obviously your fluid level. When the pumps start making a little bit of noise, you know you either want to tackle this sooner than later before you have to throw a pump at the vehicle. Another way to tell if your fluid is going bad and or your filter element, which is built into the reservoir by the way, is by removing the cap, looking inside of it while it's running. If the fluid is being aerated, then you know that more than likely the filter is being clogged up. The vehicle behind us has 136,000 miles, so it is definitely due for a service. Now we're going to be using our Liqui Moly kit that comes with 2 liters of hydraulic fluid. You can also use Pentasyn CHF11S if you'd like. It also comes with the Mercedes-Benz genuine power steering reservoir and a new clamp for one of our hoses. All these parts are available on fcpeuro.com. But now that we know what we're working with, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this DIY. And now for tools. For this job, we're going to need a couple of basic tools, starting with some pliers. We're using CTA 4029. These are specifically designed for the style clamps on our return line, which we'll show you in a little bit. We have a right angle pick, which will help get those clamps off. We have another set of pliers, which will help break free the lines from our reservoir. We have a T30. We have a 1/4 inch ratchet with a 1 inch extension, which will come in handy for that T30 job. We have a syringe tool that is going to help us evacuate the fluid from our reservoir. This is CTA 7075. The lower clamp on our reservoir, we have Astro Tool 94093. This one's designed for those style constant pressure style clamps. However, if you don't have one of these, you can use pliers. However, these are very helpful. And as always, whenever doing a job with fluids like this, some sort of catch pan is going to come in handy. Now we know what we're working with. Let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, we are under the hood of the W211. To get access to our reservoir, we're going to want to remove our beauty cover. To do so, it's held on by a couple clips on the surrounding areas, 6 in total. We're going to stick our fingers underneath either end until we find one. Just help kind of pop it up. There's 1, 2. Lift from the front. And then we'll go ahead and set this to the side. Here's a better view of those clips. You have 2 on either ear, then you have 2 up front around the star emblem. Now with that, we have access to our reservoir. Now before we remove anything or take anything off, the first thing we're going to do is get some of the fluid out of here. So to do that, you're going to want to remove your cap. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we're using the CTA syringe. However, there's a ton of different tools you can use to extract the fluid. So I'm going to do my best to get out as much as possible. Then we'll put the cap back on and continue from there. All right, at this point, we're not really getting much out with our tool anymore, so we're going to go ahead and stop there for now. We can always revisit that later. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall our cap in the meantime. Now we can work on removing some of the surrounding items that are in our way. Starting with this air pipe up front. It connects one side here, one side over here, and then to this hose over here. To get that off, we're simply going to pop it out of the clips that hold it onto our reservoir. Pull back on the passenger side. And disconnect it on the driver's side solenoid. And it just pulls off from here. This line, we can pull it off. There's a retaining clip here that holds this air line, as well as some of the lines that go to our reservoir. You can just pop it out of place there and tuck it over to the side. Get it out of your way. Next on the items to remove, we have this vacuum line that runs from this valve and feeds behind our expansion tank. That vacuum line is held on by a retaining clip built into the expansion tank. You want to make sure you remove the vacuum line from here before pulling the tank out so you don't risk ripping or damaging that vacuum line. To get that off, we're simply going to pull away from the valve. Just separated from our line, no big deal. And then pull the vacuum line up, off that retaining clip, and then just tuck it somewhere behind this solenoid, and we'll come back to it later. All right. Next on our list, we have our expansion tank that's actually held on by a T30 right on this engine support bracket. So we have a T30 here that we're going to remove. I got a small T30 on my extension with my 1/4-inch ratchet. All right, now before we remove our reservoir, we're going to go ahead and free up the lines from these 2 clips that hold them in place so that we have some more room to wiggle this as we pull it up. To do that, you simply pull them towards you, freeing them up. There's 1, there's 2. That way they'll have a little bit more play. Now we can go ahead and work on pulling our reservoir up and off of its retaining bracket. To free up this reservoir, put one hand underneath it, use your other hand by the cap, and simply pull up. That's pretty good. That's going to give us good access to the 2 clamps that we need to remove. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Before I go ahead and remove any clamps, I'm going to go ahead and situate myself with a pig mat. If you don't have one of these, I recommend a dirty shop towel or even a garbage bag, something plastic, to catch any fluid that may come out of any of these lines. So I'm going to situate myself with a pig mat down below. All right, that should be more than enough. I'm going to start with this top line here. You can use a small pick or flathead screwdriver to break this off. These clamps are typically reusable. However, if you end up mangling them, you're going to want to replace it with a new one. So I'll give it a shot first with the pick. There we go. Really gently, you can use some pliers to break the seal from the hose to the reservoir. Just give it a little twist. And I'll work it right off. With that done, we're going to go ahead and set this line to the side. We'll come back to that in a little bit. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the stopper from our new tank and just slip it into the old reservoir so we don't give ourselves an additional place to have a leak. I'm going to kind of hold this like this for a moment to see if I can get some of the fluid left in here to go down before I remove this clamp. Just trying to lessen the amount of spillage we're going to have here. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our Astro tool to remove this lower clamp and just kind of bring it back a little bit. Again, if you don't have one of these, you can probably get these with some pliers. But I highly recommend getting yourself a pair of these. All right. Now we should be able to pull this lower hose off of our expansion tank. Get ready to catch some fluid. Nice. Not too bad. I can see the fluid sitting right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my syringe again, and I'm just going to pull out the little bit that's left in here. It's not going to hurt anything. With that situated, we can get rid of this old tank. I'm going to hang on to this yellow piece for our new one. Put the stopper back in for now. You can go ahead and remove this bottom stopper and slip our line back on to our new tank. Once we're happy with how it's orientated, knowing that it's going to live somewhat like that back in the vehicle, we can put our clamp back on using our Astro tool. All right, that's looking good there. Now we're gonna go ahead and put our reservoir somewhat back in place. Just like that is gonna do for now. We're gonna wanna go ahead and run the system as we flush the fluid. So we wanna make sure this is somewhat level. So let's go ahead and take our return line. We're gonna grab a hose or something to set up a way to catch the fluid coming out of here. And we'll show you how exactly the flush portion of this DIY comes into play. So what I went ahead and did now is I removed the small rubber portion of line from our return line and fed this clear tube over it so that we can see the fluid coming out, going into our drain pan. Once we start seeing some fresh fluid come out, we'll know we have flushed the system to a decent amount. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is take off our new cap on our new reservoir. And now with the cap off, we're going to go ahead and top off our reservoir with some fresh liquid moly. What's nice about these containers is they have a built-in straw that comes in really handy when you're filling up a system like this, so you don't really need to grab a funnel. Because we're flushing out the system, I'm basically going to fill it until I can see the fluid up top. I'm not worried about overfilling right now since we are going to be draining at the same time. Now, before we do anything else, I'm going to hop inside the vehicle. I'm just going to reach my arm in, put the car in accessory mode, and we're going to turn our steering wheel from full lock left to full lock right. We're going to do that a couple times until we see the fluid drop down a bit in our reservoir. So let's go ahead and do that. Right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and top off the reservoir a bit more. As you can see, just turning the wheel full left, lock, and right is cycling through the old dirty fluid out. You can see on our bottle how green the new fluid is. So once we start seeing that color a little bit, we'll know we've done somewhat of a decent job here. Our reservoir is nice and full. And we're just going to continue turning the wheel full lock left, full lock right, until we start seeing some fresh fluid come through. All right, just a little bit below low. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the wheel a few more times, check the color. I'm pretty happy with what's coming out. Then we'll go ahead and reinstall our return line and then continue on this DIY. All right, my good people, at this point you saw the fluid coming through our clear hose was looking pretty good, a lot greener than the brown murky stuff that came out. What I'm going to go ahead and do now is remove my clear line and work on reconnecting it to my reservoir. But before I touch the reservoir, to avoid making a mess, we're going to put our cap back on. And don't worry, we'll check our fluid level at the end before we wrap this up. We're going to go ahead and take our rubber section of hose that we removed earlier, feed that back on. And something I want to show you, which is really cool about these clamps, like I mentioned at the beginning, you can reuse them. Obviously, you can replace them if you mangle them. But if you have the special pliers, which we mentioned at the beginning for these style clamps, it's really satisfying to see them go back together. That's it. You just hear them click. They latch on. Pretty beautiful thing. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the new clamp we got with our kit, because why not? We'll get that situated into place. I'm going to take the yellow plug off of our reservoir, feed our line back on, and we'll go ahead and clamp it with our tool. Now, yes, there is alternatives to these clamps if you want to go with a traditional style worm clamp or even like a fuel line style clamp. But if you're going to be doing jobs like this on these Mercedes, there's a lot of these clamps. I recommend you get some of those pliers. With that situated back on, we're going to go ahead and feed our reservoir back into place and then work on tucking our lines back into their little clips that hold them in their homes. When you're feeding your reservoir back in, you want to make sure your aligning dowel goes back into the rubber grommet that sits right above the thermostat. That helps lock everything into place. You can feel with your finger, squish it down, and everything should line up beautifully for that T30. So let's go ahead and install that T30 while we have it here. Got my T30 Start that by hand. Now we'll go ahead and just snug this down by hand. With that situated, we're going to make sure our lines are back into place along with our expansion tank line that we removed earlier. With our expansion tank in its home, we're going to go ahead and put our lines back in their home on their respective clips over here. We have our top expansion tank hose. The next spot here is for our air hose that we removed earlier. Then we can just feed the next two power steering lines back like so. Beautiful. Now with that done, one thing I wanted to mention, which I don't know if we were clear about in the beginning or not, obviously we're rotating the wheels full left and full light rock. We have the car lifted up a bit so that the wheels can spin freely. So if you haven't done that before you got to this point, just make sure you do that versus fighting the wheels on the ground. You don't need the added resistance. Now we're going to go ahead and button up everything else, and then we'll come back and make sure our fluid level is correct. So next on our laundry list, we're going to work in the reverse order. We're going to situate our vacuum line that we removed earlier. Feed that back out. Make sure it goes into our valve nicely. And then we're going to squeeze it into that retaining clip that comes built into our reservoir. All right, that looks happy. Next, we're going to grab our air line that we removed earlier. Now we're going to go ahead and reconnect our Y elbow that goes to both valves. Now would be a good time to inspect it, make sure there's no cracks in any of it. Ours looks like it's in pretty good shape, so we'll go ahead and put it back on. Feeding it onto our line first. And then we just make sure it's seated on both of our valves. All right, that looks beautiful. I'm happy with that. Now that that's all situated, let's go ahead and work on getting our level correct on our reservoir. So start by removing the cap. And obviously the system's cold, so we're going to want to go for the cold level reading. If you can see that on camera, we'll have Mike zoom in for you. But we're just touching the bottom of the dipstick. I'm going to clean this off, check it one more time, see if that still reads, and if not, we'll go from there. All right, we have a clean dipstick. So as you can see, that was just from getting it in before. There's actually nothing reading, so we're going to top it off a little bit, see if we get a reading, and then once we get somewhat of a reading on the dipstick, we're going to turn our wheels full lock left and right again, check it again, and then we'll just keep adding until we're happy with our level. All right, my good people, at that point, our fluid level is good. We are happy with where it's at. We'll obviously take this girl for a drive, let her warm up, and make sure that our level is still correct. But now all that we have left to do, after making sure that everything else that we disturbed is back on, we're going to grab our beauty cover, put that back over. And just like I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that your 6 tabs locate themselves back in their proper homes. You have 2 on either airbox. You have 1 by where that T30 sat, near our engine mount here. And we have 1 up front that sits on our reservoir. Line everything up gently and start pressing down. And that's going to be it for today, my good people. Another DIY in the books. Overall, pretty straightforward. A little bit messy, but not too bad. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did on the W211 today, leave them in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.